They came in the night and bolted my life into someone else's plan, a cold steel gate across the only road that led to my place, shining under the porch light like it belonged to a different town. I remember standing there with my coffee, the hinges still warm from the welder's torch, and thinking, this is not how this ends. They thought a piece of metal and a keypad could rewrite who I am, and that's where they miscalculated. My name's Tom Reyes. I grew up where the road thins out. People know each other by their dog's name and the milkman's truck. I bought the property 10 years ago, acres and an old garage, enough to tinker, enough to breathe. Then one Tuesday, a gate showed up and everything tilted. At first I thought it was a prank. Neighbors put up silly things, sometimes a plastic flamingo, a weird sign. But this was proper. Heavy metal, a keypad bolted to the post, a brand new lock that looked like it cost more than my lawnmower. There was a placard, lacquered and official looking, with a name I'd never heard before, Greenwood Commons Association, and an address that wasn't mine. I walked the boundary line with the county plat in my pocket, fingers tracing inked lines that had been there longer than any of the board members. The gate sat 15 feet inside my property. I could feel the absurdity of it in the bones. I called the number on the placard. A woman answered, voice like she'd swallowed a library and still kept her patience. We're improving access, she said. It's for everyone's safety. The word safety came out like a weapon. Her name was Evelyn Carr, board president, though everyone called her Evie. She smiled over the phone and promised to take care of it. 2 days later, they showed up in white SUVs, doors opening like they owned the sunrise, and Evie stood there in a blazer and tall boots looking like catalogs and county lines had fused into a person. It turned into a slow-motion collision, me with the plat map, her with the authority she'd invented. People watch you when something feels like a story. Neighbors drifted from porches, lawn chairs, and phones in hand. Evie had a calm I'd expect from someone who believes rules bend for them. We put this in the common way, she said, lowering her voice so the cameras would catch it. You'll understand. I understood I wasn't going to be able to drive my truck through my driveway whenever I wanted. I'm not an angry man by nature, but there's a certain kind of heat that comes from being told you don't belong on your own land. I went home that night and thought, okay, I'll be reasonable. I printed the survey, pulled out the deed, and found the old county surveyor's stamp. The next morning, I recorded our conversation, just me, my phone in my pocket, because when people speak with power, they prefer to reshape memory. I wanted the record unshaped. That's when Evie escalated. She sent a violation notice, notarized and full of jargon, and then she sent 2 men in uniforms. They didn't wear sheriff patches, but they wore hats and authority the way cheap uniforms wear threads, convincing at a glance. He said it with a polite edge that felt like a razor. There was a moment, a quiet, ridiculous moment when everything might have gone a different way. I could have backed down, filed paperwork, waited for lawyers with long, patient smiles to decide if the ink mattered. Instead, I walked to the gate that night, just me and a lamp and the smell of cut metal. I wrapped a chain around the latch because I couldn't stand the idea of walking back to my kitchen and pretending the gate wasn't there. I didn't make a plan to turn into a vigilante. I wanted a simple, human thing. The ability to walk my yard without being reminded I was renting my own life. Morning brought a crowd. She tapped the keypad, eyes a mix of irritation and surprise, as the remote that always opens for her family did not click into magic. The chain clinked like the punchline of a joke she hadn't expected. The legal notices came fast after. Unlawful obstruction, trespass, language drafted to frighten. The board leaned into the theater of formality while the neighborhood drank it like cheap wine. But the thing about theater is that if someone gives you a real script, a county map, a title deed, the old survey, it cuts through the performance. I posted scans. I told the story on my block's neighborhood page, and some folks started showing up with coffee, curious and a little pissed. People like to see the literal line between boldness and nonsense. Then something happened I did not expect. A voice recording I'd taken weeks earlier, just a casual call where Evie bragged, offhand, about how they'd smoothly shifted the boundaries and how a few signatures and a contractor could make facts. I played it to the crowd, and you could see the air change. People pull suspension of disbelief in and let it go. The 2 men in uniforms grew quieter. Their posture loosened like threads coming undone. When you catch someone supposed to be in charge admitting they manufactured the charge, the whole thing starts to smell. At the peak, the kind of scene you imagine in a movie, a real sheriff's deputy pulled up. Not the men in uniforms who looked like props, but a marked car and a woman with a badge who took off her sunglasses like she wanted the sun to know she meant business. She listened to the recordings, read the printout of the survey, and then asked Evie a question that landed like a gavel. Who deputized those men? Evie's face flickered a quick, human glitch, and she offered nothing that held. The deputy made a few calls, exchanged a few notes, and then things got loud because drama enjoys a crowd. Evie was asked to step aside. I remember the sound of clipboards and the rustle of a blazer as if a stagehand was moving scenery. Someone shouted that this was too much, someone else cheered, and through it all Evie kept saying, "You're making this about me," with the sort of wounded indignation practiced by people who think being called out is worse than being caught. She was escorted away, handcuffs not theatrical but real, and the expression when the metal clicked was not the face of a villain at a climax. It was the face of a person who had let a little power sediment into her bones until she forgot what it felt like to be wrong. When it was over, it felt oddly private. The deputies stayed until the paperwork was done. They walked the boundary with a respectful nod. I stood by my gate and installed a sign sharp, honest, and a little smug. Private property, authorized access only. People clapped awkwardly, like at the end of a long story you did not expect to be true. My neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Louise, handed me a thermos of coffee and said in that plain, small voice she uses for important things, "You did right." That meant more than any headline. But it wasn't a neat ending. Evie's supporters online painted me as a belligerent troublemaker. The HOA posted their side, complete with glossy photos and sharp fonts. Some folks called for mediation, others called me reckless. I filed my formal complaint. She filed her countersuit. The paperwork keeps going through offices, stamped and faded at the edges. The point isn't the finality of law, it's that the story didn't vanish under the weight of a manufactured authority. It shifted. This whole thing changed something in me. I learned that ownership isn't just paper and plat lines. It's the right to show up and say who you are. I learned that a lot of power is noise suits and remotes and shiny SUVs, and that once you put some facts on a table, the noise has to account for itself. I also learned how quickly a neighborhood can become a chorus, how people will show up with coffee and cameras and a willingness to be the public in a small civic theater. There are still gray parts. I don't sleep like I used to, a habit from the night with the chain, I suppose, and there's a lingering awkwardness when I see the empty spot where Evie's SUV used to park. But when dusk comes and the hinges cool and the wind moves across the field, I stand at the gate and listen. The sound is ordinary. A far dog barking, the highway hum, a neighbor mowing a lawn. It's the ordinary I fought for. So here's what I want to know from you. I want to hear the messy part. If this made you think about what ownership really means, hit like, share the story, and let's get a conversation going about justice, community, and the thin line between order and control.